Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. We're here to talk to you today about our findings and predictions regarding the succession in Point Pleasant Park following Hurricane Juan.
In the fall of 2003, Hurricane Juan hit the coast of Nova Scotia as a Category 2 storm. It tore through the edge of the province and ripped apart Point Pleasant Park, located in the south end of Halifax. It forced closure of the park for about 8 months, and the park saw a decrease in about 70% of its canopy. This loss of habitat and structure allowed for new niches to arise, however, it also caused the destruction of others. The park experienced slow recovery following the hurricane, with effects still showing today. And in combination with the intense effects of the hurricane, the natural location of the park along the windy coast of Halifax may have contributed to the slower recovery. Here, there's a before and after photo of the park, and as well as a NASA image of the hurricane. Halifax and Point Pleasant Park are located on the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. The park traditionally was known as Amnugati, and it is a significant Mi'kmaq gathering place. Following the colonization of the land, it served as a British defense site, and you can still find military structures throughout the park. Today, Point Pleasant is used by the public for its extensive trails and ocean view, in addition to its cultural impact and history. Point Pleasant Park is an Acadian forest ecosystem, and before the hurricane, it was deemed overmature and conifer dominant, with the most dominant climax species as the red spruce. We will be looking at secondary succession of tree species throughout the park. This is the change in ecological community over time following a destructive disturbance. We will be examining at what point Point Pleasant Park is in recovery by analyzing how the forest community changed following the hurricane. Doing this, we focused on data that analyzed the Shannon Diversity Index, species abundance, and species richness. The hypotheses that we will be testing are that 1. Tree density will not increase over time, 2. Red spruce will remain the dominant species, and 3. The Shannon Diversity Index will not have increased over time.
Second-year ecology students from Dalhousie University studied sites that were heavily impacted by the hurricane. These sites were 20 meters by 20 meters, and the students measured these sites from 2004 to 2025, excluding 2005, 2007, 2016, and 2020 due to external factors. They measured the diameter at breast height of these trees, taken 4.5 feet from the ground using a diameter measuring tape. All trees which had a diameter of 2.5 centimeters or greater were identified by tree type and were recorded. The total number, density of tree species, and the Shannon Diversity Index were calculated and recorded per study area. We used linear regression analysis to study how trees and tree species and their densities changed after Hurricane Juan. Since the specific study sites had variation each year, we could not represent the data with a line graph. The linear regression model shows the trends of the data over time. A linear regression analysis was performed to identify whether total tree density in Point Pleasant Park increased over time after Hurricane Juan. Total tree density per 400 meters squared was measured from 2004 to 2025, excluding 2005, 2007, 2016, and 2020. As you can see in Figure 1, there was a significant positive relationship in total tree density over time, with an R-squared value of 0.4485, which shows a moderate correlation between total density and time. The F value was 72.38, and the p-value was 3.921 times 10 to the negative 13. Therefore, tree density is recovering after the hurricane and can be estimated with the regression equation shown in Figure 1. Since total tree density is recovering after Hurricane Juan, the forest community is regrowing. Prior to this hurricane, Point Pleasant Park was classified as a mature and overmature forest. The largest trees were white pines, with many red and white spruces as well. During 2017 and 2018 field surveys, approximately half of the park was found to be in early successional stages, with smaller sites exhibiting later successions. Hurricanes blow large trees down and allow for forest regrowth. Since a lot of Point Pleasant was very mature, the older trees being blown down changed the forest community. Since the 2003 hurricane, the forest is regrowing and showing the earlier successional stages. As this forest grows towards its climax community, which is when the forest is stable and mature, I predict that the forest will grow similarly to how the forest was before the 2003 hurricane. The forest community was over mature and stable at that time. Since the location is the same, I believe that the climax forest community will be similar to the community before the hurricane.
Moving on to question 2, which was looking at the change in dominant species over time, we will start with the red spruce analysis. A linear regression was performed to determine how the density of P.K. rubens, or red spruce, the dominant species in 2004, changed in the years following the 2003 hurricane. Tree density per 400 meters squared was measured annually from 2004 to 2025, excluding information from 2005, 2007, 2016, and 2020. Linear regression was used to determine whether the change in species density over time was predictable and whether the year indicated species density. Results are shown below and showed an increase over time from an average of 6 trees per 400 meters squared in 2004 to an average of 8 trees per 400 meters squared in 2025. The regression analysis showed an increasing slope of 0.34 trees per year per 400 meters squared, with an R value of 0.13, indicating a weak correlation between year and density. For the red maple analysis, linear regression was performed to determine how the density of acre rhumbum, or red maple, which was the dominant species in 2025, changed in the years following the 2003 hurricane. Tree density was measured in the same way over the same amount of time, excluding the same years as the red spruce analysis. Linear regression was performed for the same reasons, and results shown below showed an increase over time from an average of 0 trees per 400 meters squared in 2004 to an average of 30 trees per 400 meters squared in 2025. The regression analysis showed an increasing slope of 2.24 trees per 400 meters squared per year, with an R value of 0.13, indicating a weak but positive correlation between year and density. The dramatic increase in red maple density indicates a shift in dominance from red spruce to red maple after the disturbance. The 2003 hurricane and the removal of red spruce due to beetle infestation significantly reduced canopy cover, increasing light availability. Because red maple is a shade-intolerant tree, it responded quickly to these brighter conditions and began increasing rapidly around 2009. Although red spruce showed a slight increase in density over time, the weak correlation suggests that other factors are influencing its recovery. Red maple increased much faster and became the dominant species by 2025. As the forest moved toward a mature state, the canopy cover will begin to increase and light availability will decline. Since red spruce is more shade tolerant, it may gradually recover under these conditions. However, current trends do not support the hypothesis that red spruce would remain dominant. Therefore, the hypothesis must be rejected.
We used linear regression analysis to examine the relationship between the Point Pleasant Park Shannon Diversity Index and time after Hurricane Juan, excluding the years where data collection was not possible. This resulted in a significant positive relationship between the Shannon Diversity Index and time, with time explaining 33% of the variation in the index. Due to the result of this analysis, we reject the null hypothesis that the Shannon Diversity Index would not change over time. The Shannon Diversity Index has increased over the years since Hurricane Juan. As this index covers both species richness and evenness, the result's not all that surprising. The hurricane reset ecological succession by removing 70% of the canopy cover. This allowed shade-intolerant pioneer species to colonize the area, adding to the existing survivors and increasing species richness. This would in turn increase the Shannon Diversity Index, as it is dependent on richness. The increase in diversity can also be explained by the intermediate disturbance hypothesis, in which diversity increases in response to moderate disturbance levels. We predict that as the forest approaches its climax community, the Shannon Diversity Index will plateau. Typically, as the forest reaches later stages of secondary succession, larger trees dominate the area. This would lead to an increase in canopy cover and shade, reducing the survivability of shade-intolerant pioneer species. It would also decrease species richness, but increase species evenness, leading to a consistent diversity index. We can already see this slightly in our regression figure. The green overlaying line generally follows the densest collection of points on the graph. We can see that while the index has slowly increased over time, it appears to be slowly stabilizing in recent years. However, this line was not calculated. It was simply added post-analysis to emphasize a visual trend. Based on the results of our analysis, we predict that Point Pleasant Park is currently at an early to mid-successional stage. Firstly, the current dominant species, red maple, is classified by the Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources as a mid-successional vegetation type. Secondly, some studies claim that Point Pleasant Park was in a stage of early succession as recent as 2015 due to the sharp increase in diversity. They also state that the diversity would begin to decrease as the forest matured, which is consistent with our diversity index graph. Additionally, the University of Chicago indicates that the intermediate species will dominate a forest in mid succession and that this typically occurs anywhere between 5 to 150 years into the succession process. This further supports the idea that Point Pleasant Park is in early to mid succession. It is also important to note that because Point Pleasant Park is an urban park, succession may have been impacted. After the hurricane, most dead trees were removed from the park. This can deplete soil nutrients and impact the progress of natural succession. Luckily, this was mostly avoided due to a management strategy. Also, the many trails and visitor traffic in Point Pleasant Park can act as corridors for non native species to slowly integrate into the park. Prior to Hurricane Juan, these species mostly bordered the edges of Point Pleasant, but as more of the original vegetation was removed, the non native species had more and more opportunities to not only grow along the trail borders, but also potentially cover the entire park. We would also like to mention that it is important to consider Indigenous knowledge during the recovery of Point Pleasant. One teaching, called Two-Eyed Seeing, encourages the integration of Western science and Indigenous knowledge. In the context of Point Pleasant, this integration could shift restoration techniques from only focusing on ecological metrics to also focusing on the restoration of culturally significant native plants within the park. By integrating these two areas of knowledge, we may also learn to naturally treat the land with more respect and encourage responsible recovery plans.
We would like to acknowledge that Halifax, Nova Scotia, including Dalhousie University and Point Pleasant Park, are situated on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are all treaty people. We would like to acknowledge the work of the Biology 2060 teaching team, Dr. Joanna Zaguras, Dr. Juan Carvel Creturo, and our TA, Kaylin Collins, for instructing us in lecture in lab. We would like to acknowledge the work of past Biology 2060 students who have collected the data that make this project possible, as well as current students Claire Martin, Taylor Reese, and myself for putting this report and presentation together.